I realise that the concept of this video is quite niche, but it's something that I wanted to discuss as it's an issue that I keep running into. In order for the video to make sense, a bit of understanding of what's going on psychologically is probably required. In that department, I'm definitely no expert, but I'll do my best to explain. Let's begin with the premise of the video. When it comes to disposable income, my money tends to go on one of three things: gaming, watches, or travel. Having said that, the figures involved mean that really it's a binary choice between watches and travel, if I'm being honest. The issue we're going to discuss is when those two passions of mine combine. Why have I started telling myself never to buy a watch while on holiday, and should there be any exceptions to that rule? Some personal context. When I'm home in the UK, I do almost all of my shopping online when it comes to watches. There's more choice, better prices, and the only decent watch shops in my area are essentially pawnbrokers. As a result, the concept of window shopping isn't really something that happens to me very often. And if I'm brutally honest, someone coming over and actively trying to sell me a watch is a surefire way to get me not to. You might wonder, how does any of that change overseas? Well, my birthday falls during a holiday season in the UK, and my family will usually take a trip after Christmas too. I'm not sure how relatable this is, but people tend to just give me money because they've no idea what I want. I don't mind that, but here is where some odd psychology comes into play. Gifted money doesn't feel the same to me as money I've earned. For some reason, I recoil at the idea that I've ended up spending it on the weekly shop, fuel, bills, or other humdrum expenses. That statement is probably the most first world problems thing I've ever said in my life. I'm not remotely trying to look for sympathy, just trying to get you to understand the circumstances by which I find myself overseas with money burning a hole in my pocket. The rational among you in the audience will rightly say, that's idiotic. Just save it towards something you actually want. I completely agree, and in part I guess this video is a way of me trying to tell myself that. But when the inevitable holiday blues kick in and the daily grind starts to loom large on the horizon again, there I am staring at watches through a window, desperate for that dopamine hit to push those feelings away. I've only actually caved into them twice, and while I live my life as regret-free as I can, neither stayed in my collection after my recent purge. One I've documented on the channel when I reviewed it previously. You've seen imagery of it up until this point. The Seiko 5 Sports 55th limited edition rerun of the original model that spawned the range. A really good looking watch in my opinion, but would I have bought it at home? I don't think so. The reviews of the bracelet would have put me off. The explanation of the pressure bezel would have put me off, and ultimately the thickness of the model would have put me off. I won't dwell on that further because if you want more information or more detailed thoughts on the model, I'll leave a link to that video in the description. That brings me to my second holiday purchase, which I think is far and away the most illogical I've ever made. Long-term viewers of the channel will know I have a weakness for the Casio G-Shock octagonal models. That started with the GMS 2100 3A, and really it should have stopped there because to this day it's still my favourite. However, on my birthday a few years ago on the beautiful Portuguese island of Madeira, I spent the morning making some of the most idiotic purchases of my life. An OLED Nintendo Switch that won't charge through a UK 3-pin plug, and this Casio GM 2100N 2AER. Of the two, with the embarrassing addition of an adapter, the Nintendo was a bar better buy. I finished Dark Souls Remastered on it recently and it's seen a lot of use, but the Casio, I don't know what I was thinking. Now the look of the watch is great. Aesthetically, I can understand why it stood out to me in the window, but beyond that, no rational thought has happened here. I'd bought the GMS 2100 because of its smaller dimensions and knew that the GM 2100 would be too big and look too bulky for me. Not only that, but this model suffers a lot with legibility. One of the main flaws of the octagonal range is how hard it is to read the digital display, Well, this model is not the most legible when it comes to the analog display at a glance either. Perhaps even worse, with exchange rates taken into account, I paid a fair bit more than it would have cost if I bought it at home. Definitely not my finest horological moment. Before we move on, I think it's probably prudent to say that while I view these purchases as mistakes, that doesn't mean that they would be for other people, or that these are bad watches. Far from it. While the 2 AER is not the most legible, it does have a lot going for it. The monochromatic design is a potential selling point for the model, especially if you like blue, you're going to like this watch. Compared to the smaller metal models, the bezel also has the full gamut of side button labels. Compared to the plastic models, the finishing and overall quality is a noticeable step up. There is a gap in price, as both the plastic and metal models have dropped a lot with age. At the time of making the video, the cheapest I could find the 2 AER was just above the $160 mark, so roughly double the cost of a plastic model. The functionality of the models is the same, and clearly the metal version will be heavier and easier to damage in terms of picking up scratches. But it is a fair trade-off, and I think the upgrade is worth it. Though, as I think is clear from the video, I would personally go for the smaller option. I wore this watch throughout the holiday, but once home, it sat in the watch box. Came out for a day or two to capture this footage, and was then sold on to a new home. If there is one key consideration I value above all else when it comes to assessing a watch, it's wrist time. If I never wear it, it really isn't for me. Hopefully, these experiences explain the title of the video. Under these circumstances, I definitely think it was weak and idiotic of me to spend money in this way. I'm trying to drill this mantra in deep, because I have a trip to Japan coming up later in the year, and if there's anywhere on earth where I am liable to make the same mistakes, it's Tokyo. There are so many models made specifically for the Japanese domestic market that I already know it's going to test my willpower. So, what can I do? What can any of us do to stop an overseas watch purchase from just being a holiday romance? Well, what I'm trying to do to counteract this is research. For example, one model I've had my eye on for a long time is the Royal Smith from Kuo. It's a beautiful and elegant traditional dress watch, which isn't something I have in my current collection. As we're planning a day or two in Kyoto, there's an opportunity to avoid things like shipping costs, import taxes, service fees, and so on, by buying straight from the source. But I already know exactly which model, how much it would cost to get in the UK, and what a good price would be, and how exchange rates have been looking recently. So it isn't that I would entirely rule out a holiday purchase, but from my experience, spur of the moment ones driven by emotion are definitely not the way to go. I've said it before a few times, the name impulsive watches isn't an accidental one. There have definitely been a few impulsive mistakes along the way. I can only apologise if this video comes across as a self-indulgent ramble. I'd love to hear from you in the comments if you can relate to this, but by all means I'm also open to being called out if you think I'm chatting nonsense. A few weeks ago I released a short retrospective video about the history of Seiko, and I'd also love to hear from you which brand would you like to see me covering next. I've been teetering between looking into the history of Citizen or Hamilton and could just use a nudge one way or the other, but I'm more than open to other brands too. As ever, thank you for your time. If you've enjoyed the video or found it informative, consider leaving a like and subscribing if you want to see more content like this.